Hi, Julie. How are you doing? Milo? Okay, I'm just making my watch quiet. Hello, Claire. Hi. Hello there. Hello, Marie. Hi. Welcome back. That's a nice statue you have behind you, Marie. It's quite funny. There's this particular incense that I discovered from, something I hadn't used from India. And Shiho, welcome back. Hello.
It's been a while.
Yes.
Finally,
Are you back in London or are you in Japan?
I'm still in Japan. Actually, I've started new job since April. So
Okay,
yeah, sometimes I try to that I just wanted to join this course, but I couldn't.
of
But
course.
finally, I could.
Well, welcome back. Anyway, nowadays, I've got another laptop here where I'm also putting it on YouTube. So if you
Oh,
miss
I
it,
see.
you'll find it on
Uh-huh.
my channel as well. So it makes it a bit
I
easier.
see.
But welcome back. It's good to see you.
Oh, thank you.
Hello, Raisha. Hello, you're new. Hello, welcome.
Thank
And
you.
hello, Svetlina. Hi. Yeah, I was saying that I discovered, I just found an incense that I used to really love. And it's one of those really thick sticks. And it's the smell is divine. And I used to put it in this room while we were doing the class. And then as soon as I open the door, the smoke detector goes off because it's so thick. So yeah, I'm not using it nowadays. Hello,
What is it
Jacqueline.
called?
Welcome. Pardon?
What is it called, the incense?
It's called Cyflora. Cyflora. It's quite a unique one. I don't think a lot of people know about it, but when I used to go to India quite a lot, it just used to be one of those things that I was introduced to. Hello, Claire, and Bella is here. Excellent. So many new faces. Welcome, everybody. Well, what I normally do is I will mute you, and then we will begin. Okay. Those of you who've been here before, we have very few rules. In fact, we have no rules. So if you need to leave early, that's absolutely fine. If you need to change your posture, if you need to have a sip of water, why do we have so few rules? Because we want to be here voluntarily. Yes, we've all read the books. We know what the teachers say meditation is good for you. But in this practice, we don't even call it a meditation. At least, yes, that's the way I advertise it on the Jamyang website and on Meetup. But when you get here, we all try to remind ourselves we're just gonna call it sitting, call it a sitting. We're here to sit. And we all know how to sit. If your eyes are closed, start exploring what it feels like to be seated where your hands are, Which parts of your body are in contact with the surfaces underneath you? Whether you're on a chair or on a cushion or on just on flooring or a bench on a park. And one thing that's going to give you a very nice indication about your posture is the way in which your spinal column is currently placed. So you might even be lying down, and that's absolutely fine. But notice the way in which the vertebrae are stacked, one on top of the other. And of course, if you're seated, notice how the tail end rests on the pelvic bone, how the top end, it connects with the base of the skull, it supports your head. It allows your head to be held up in this way. It works together with all of the neck muscles. Feel the arch within your spine. And in fact, this is a nice time to give the spine a little bit of a stretch. And that means reaching the top end of the spinal column, reaching it upwards, stretching it upward. You'll notice yourself getting a little bit of height, a little bit more height, maybe a few millimeters, maybe a few centimeters. The tail end of the spinal column. Push it downwards. Feel the stretch. Feel the arch. Feel your shoulders to your right, to your left. The placement of your arms and your hands, where your hands are resting. And in fact, the hands can be something quite nice to play with, because our hands, they have many, many nerve endings, and so they're quite sensitive. And so activate the tips of your fingers, and then notice where the fingers are resting. Notice the temperature of the area which they appear to be in contact with. Of course, if your fingers are resting on a particular part of your body, you might feel the warmth of the body. And then towards the sides, you might feel it getting a little bit cooler, where it begins interacting with the air. Can you notice how many different dimensions there are to just simply being seated? That's why we don't even need to meditate. We're only interested in what's unfolding at this moment, our experience of this moment. And you can continue with it by exploring those surfaces underneath you. What's directly underneath you? Is it a cushion or a chair or a mattress? When's the last time you explored how soft or hard that surface is? Well, now's a good moment. Let's notice the way in which that If it's a soft surface, notice the way in which it molds to the shape of our body, how it provides us with that perfect amount of support and balance. And of course, if it's a harder surface, notice the way in which your body magically molds to its shape, allowing you to be comfortable, allowing you to be stable. And then there are the legs. For me, because I'm on the floor, I'm on some cushions, I can feel the flooring, the carpeting underneath my knees, which feel so much more harder than the cushions that I'm resting on. If you're on a chair, then the soles of your feet, whether or not your feet are bare or whether they have um, some form of fabric covering them, or your shoes, you're getting a better image of, not an image, yeah, but sometimes an image is formed within the mind's eye as to what your posture's like. We release that. We return to the experience, feeling the life flowing through our bodies, which allows us to experience this posture despite our eyes being closed. Your face, your ears, your neck, these exposed parts of skin, interacting with the space around you, interacting with the air around us, giving us a more accurate reading of the temperature. Can you notice how when we explore the temperature in this room, sometimes different parts of the body they give you different readings. The face might tell you something, the ears might tell you something, the arms might tell you something completely different. Now we're beginning to experience our bodies more completely as a sitting, breathing body of awareness, getting a slightly more accurate reading, a more balanced reading of the temperature. In many ways, this short exercise with which we are beginning today's practice, it gives you a very nice insight into what the practice is about. It's about directing the mind, focusing the mind. Initially, we started with one part of the body and then we moved. We remember we've started with the spinal column and then we moved on to different parts of the body. We were focusing on different parts of the body. And that's what the practice is. It's about training ourselves to focus the mind on one thing. And when you begin focusing on that one thing, everything else is still there, but it hovers in the background. Like some of the challenges, the stories, the conversation that happened earlier this morning or last week, your work, it's still there, but it lingers in the background. You are focusing. It's almost as though you were holding on to a spotlight, in one of those theatrical productions where there's someone in charge of the spotlight and you're learning to focus the mind. But one important aspect to recognize is that when we focus the mind, we are focusing it, at least during this practice, we are focusing it on things that aren't too interesting, things that don't really stimulate new thoughts. I don't know if that makes sense, because if you were focusing on a TV program or a radio or program or a podcast or something like that, you'd notice that object of your focus will stimulate new thoughts. Some thoughts you've never thought before, some completely new, fresh perspectives. It will build momentum within the mind. But in this practice, in our practice, in this hour that we've set aside, we're going to learn how to slow the thought process down. And you may already have started to notice the thinking process slowing down, not completely, but maybe a little bit slower if you were quite aware of your mind. Notice the mind. It's very possible that you weren't aware of how fast the mind was moving at the start of the practice. So let us pay attention now, and then we could notice these subtle changes happening. Notice what's happening within the mind right now. Reminding yourself that in this practice, we're going to see the mind as a separate entity. In fact, that's what this practice is based on, that the mind is in fact a separate entity, almost like a filter, almost like a big curtain. That's right, you can visualize a big curtain. And this curtain, depending on how thick or thin it is, that's how much light it's letting through. When you look at the curtain a little bit closer, you'll notice that it's made up of many, many threads, many, many pieces of thread. Some moving up, top to bottom, some from right to left. Now, in this metaphor, the threads, the individual threads that you're noticing, they're represented by our thoughts. And when you were born, when we were young, we were very dependent on the grown-ups around us. And we're all from different parts of the world, different parents. Even if we're neighbors, we've been to different schools, we sometimes speak different languages, completely different backgrounds. And as young children, and because of how dependent we are on the adults for our shelter and our food and the love and all of that, we begin to believe what they tell us. And then thoughts are created, individual threads. It starts off with a single thread and then a second one. Can you notice, after all these years, how it's turned into a curtain, a very large piece of fabric, and we call that our belief system, that which decides our mood, our personalities. And beliefs, they almost feel as though they are a part of us. And can you notice on the other side of the curtain, you're on this side. It's up to you how much light your curtain is letting through. Sometimes it might be one of those completely, I think they call them blackout curtains. And so there's very little light. You can just see light at the edges. And sometimes it's just one of those really soft, transparent net curtains. So lots of light coming through, but nevertheless, there's a curtain between yourself and the present moment, your present moment, and everything you see, experience, hear, taste. It's through this curtain called the mind, through your beliefs. On the other side, there's just light. That's it, just light. It's neither good, not bad, not painful, not deep or shallow. It just is. But how we translate it depends completely on this curtain. How how badly or how little the distortions are, it completely depends on this curtain that stands in our way. But we like this curtain. Let's remind ourselves that this curtain it has its function because sometime in the past, you learned the language English. Okay, and that includes some of the threads on this curtain. And because you learned English, there are sounds, only sounds coming out of my vocal cords. My vocal cords are vibrating. It's creating sounds. There are gaps between the sounds. But because you learned the language English, you somehow have the ability to give meaning to these sounds. You call some of these sounds words, some of them sentences, and they make sense. You give meaning to it. And this can be a very useful recognition, knowing, especially when you're in conversations with colleagues, in particular family members, those whom you are very close to. Just a simple recognition that from their lips, all that comes out are sounds, vibrating air molecules. They travel into your ear. That's it, vibrating air molecules traveling in through those passages at the side of your head. And then your eardrum, it begins to vibrate. And then there are some tiny bones inside. They begin to vibrate. And at the end of these tiny bones, there are some nerves. And these vibrations, they get converted into electrical signals that move through the brain. And somewhere along the line, they get filtered through this curtain, this blanket, the mind, and you begin giving meaning to these sounds. We are spending a few moments on this simply to contemplate on it, how empowering this practice can be in our day-to-day life, this recognition that we have the ability to interpret or choose not to be offended or hurt, and simply release some of the words that do not serve us, that enter into our experience from those around us. Back to the curtain. Now, our practice today, when I ring the bell, we're going to draw the curtains and have a direct experience of this present moment. Through our five senses. So we're not really going to use the mind to interpret and translate what's on the other side. We're going to directly experience it. And we have five doorways into the present moment. These are our five senses. When I ring the bell, we're going to begin by simply noticing. I'm assuming that most of you have your eyes closed. And that can be helpful because most of the stimulation and distractions arrive into our experience through our eyes. But it's okay if you need to have your eyes open. But if your eyes are closed or open, whatever it is, we're simply going to notice that the eyes are open or closed. My eyes are closed. But even if they are closed, I can still see shadows. I can still see a slight brown reddish as the light enters into my experience through my eyelids. And the reason we're beginning with the eyes is because usually when we find our eyes closed, it's simply me. We're usually asleep, having a nap, getting some rest. But can you notice how alert you feel, how awake you feel at this moment? Our eyes are helping us to translate this moment, this present moment, as a very unusual moment, one in which we are highly alert, very much awake, and in a practice. So, in this present moment, this is what our eyes are telling us, that we are in this practice. And the ears, now the ears, what are the ears telling us about this present moment? Listen for the bell. Let the bell be a call. A call, I think Eckhart Tolle uses the words a call for awakening or a call into presence. Wakefulness. Notice who is noticing the sounds. And then step a little bit deeper and notice the, the one who's noticing. And then you can even go a little bit deeper and notice who's noticing that noticer. And this is where we begin playing with sounds, because each and every one of us, some of you are joining from your workplaces or very noisy environments. This is one reason at the beginning of the practice we released labels such as I came here to meditate, I came here to practice mindfulness, because we've all somehow associated meditation and mindfulness practices with having an environment that's reasonably quiet. And I know that because I've been to temples where there are big signs that say, please maintain silence. Before the meditation begins, they ask those with children and those who cough to leave the room. And so that's an association. If I meditate, if I practice, there needs to be absolute silence. Everyone in the house needs to be quiet. I get really upset with them if they're making noise. And sometimes it's, you just don't have control. There's a car alarm going off outside your window. There's loud footsteps, phones going off, building works, as we all know when we practiced at Jamyang. So first of all, we're just sitting. So it doesn't matter what's happening around us. It doesn't even matter if there are loud voices. Do you remember how we give meaning to words? So if there are voices, we don't need to give them meaning. We can just say, label them, listening, listening. I'm just listening to that sound. Doesn't matter what the sound is, just listening. And then maybe it's too loud. So you label it, it's too loud. It's a loud sound. It's a loud sound. And then it just drifts away. You don't turn it into a fact. You don't need to study it. You don't need to analyze it. It just becomes like a passing cloud. And you feel your stability. But then, of course, we're all human, aren't we? And we are practicing. We're not perfect. And so there are some sounds that are very distracting. You can't help it. You can't pretend it's going to go away. Are there any sounds like that around you? Sometimes simply because of how quiet it is, you may have never noticed the ticking of a clock, and maybe that little minute ticking is starting to bother you. This is where we remind ourselves that in this practice, everything that disturbs your practice, everything that distracts you, becomes a very valuable tool that you can use in your practice. And it begins simply by recognizing that it is bothering me because I'm pushing against it. Because I'm supposed to be meditating. because I want silence. I do not like that sound. I wish it would go away. And then the chatter. Have you noticed how the chatter begins in that way? And that's why in this practice we tend to focus on things that are more neutral, things we neither feel too strongly about, neither do we dislike it too much, just neutral things. Like the sound of the bell, quite neutral to most of us. Sound of the fridge, you hardly ever notice that. That can be a very useful tool to quieten the mind. The humming of the radiator from your heating system or a fan in air conditioner in your room, you hardly notice these things. The fan on your computer, quite neutral. But then the loud voice, the car alarm, the crying baby, the barking dog. If something is disturbing you, it means you're fighting against it. And as a solution, this is how you practice. This is how it becomes a tool. You can talk to the sound. I give you permission to exist. I allow you to exist. I welcome you. In fact, I'll simply be transparent to you. I let your sound waves move through me. I'm not going to hold on to any of these sound waves. And with each ringing of the bell, feel your body dissolving. So that not only the sound waves from this bell moves through your body easily and freely, but all of the other sounds around you. And if there is a particular sound that you're still uncomfortable about, imagine that there's a particular knot in your body that's preventing the sound, that's kind of holding on to the sound. It's not letting the sound move through you. But have you ever come across a knot, especially in those drawstrings of those pieces of clothing that we often use? We just undo the knot, don't we? We just loosen it. And then pretty soon it just falls loosely. And now see what happens when I ring the bell. Can you allow that sound to move through you? It feels a little bit easier, doesn't it? When you look at it in that way. And those of you in the perfect environments where there is pin drop silence, you may be wondering, how can this be relevant to me? Because it's beautiful, it's quiet, it's lovely. I have the perfect practicing environment. We're using the sound because the same principle, the same practice applies to our thoughts and the movements within our mind. Shine the spotlight on your mind now. Notice each and every thought. Not to analyze, not to make sense, but just to know that it's a thought. And you can label it thinking, thinking, thinking. You don't have to say discussion with X or discussion with Y or my colleague. No, just thinking, thinking. You don't have to see it as a fact, just like a little soap bubble See, that's how the Zen teachers refer to thoughts as soap bubbles, just bubbles. But what happens when you bring a needle to a soap bubble? Or what happens when the soap bubble reaches the needle? When I ring the bell, notice how it pops. We call this needle the needle of awareness. And so you don't even have to give the thought an image or the name of the person. The moment you become aware of that you are thinking, pop. No longer relevant, you're here in the present moment. And since we're on the mind, since we are observing our thoughts, notice some of the qualities of your thoughts. I lead you into this. What you're going to look for is how your thoughts are almost always from the past or about the past or projections into the future. And then you can hear the tiny voice in the mind saying, no, I'm very much present here in this moment. And yes, sometimes we believe the mind, yes. But you can test it. You can test how present you are by simply noticing, is there anything about this present moment that you're complaining about? Anything that you don't like? A sensation within your body? Maybe it might be your finances, your bank balance. But have you noticed you're not in the bank right now? Have you noticed that your bank statements are not here right now? Neither is that person who annoyed you. And so you begin to notice that if there is anything that you're complaining about, even the sound of the baby crying or the dog barking, it's because the mind remembers some moment in the past. It remembers the past where the dog wasn't barking. It remembers the past when the baby wasn't crying, when the dog wasn't barking. And it wants to return to that moment in the past. And so it resists the present moment. It fights against the present moment. And remember, all we're interested in is sitting and breathing right now. Where everything everything else just fades into the background. With this bell, back to the posture. And the reason in this practice my voice keeps referring to the present moment is simply because every moment that you spend in the present moment is a moment you spend separate from your thoughts. And every moment you separate yourself from your thoughts, you discover space between the witness and the thought. And the moment you discover there is space between your witnessing self, your true self, and the thought, you no longer identify yourself as the thought. You no longer identify yourself with the mind. In fact, you release your whole personality. What does that mean? They're just words. Let's get a glimpse into what it's like having these curtains drawn. Don't get rid of the curtains, we still need them. That's how we're going to figure out this language that I'm using. But we're going to begin realizing that we only use the threads that we need to translate the present moment. When you're listening to your favorite piece of music, maybe later this afternoon, later this evening, you'll activate your sense of hearing. You'll focus on some areas. You know which streaming app you use, so you'll need that thread. You need to remember how to use the device, how to put that piece of music on. You need to remember the title of the music, maybe the artist. So you see, you're still using your mind. And then you remember there's a disagreement you had with someone. It might be your kids, a relationship, something from your childhood. Not relevant, is it? You begin to recognize, because you have recognized the space between the witness and the bubble, the thought. The bubble pops. And you bring yourself back to only that which is relevant to your present moment. And then you listen to that piece of music, and the piece of music turns into your practice. It becomes your practice. You immerse yourself in it. Everything else fades into the background. You are aligned, you are present. You hear every note, every high, every low. You hear parts from the piece of music, the vocals, the beats that you never heard before. You are present, you are aligned, you are at peace. There is stillness. You feel the enthusiasm, the joy that the music brings you. And then other bubbles may appear, but you release them. because you are now aware. We spoke about releasing the curtain, drawing the curtain. This is what it's like. Now, breathe in. Breathe in deeply. Your breath can be a very useful tool with which to explore the present moment. By allowing your in-breath to represent a new beginning and a new birth. Many of you have done this practice with me many times, and so I remind you with this bell to invoke the beginner's mind, where you breathe for the first time. But then the mind knows how many you've been breathing since the day you were born. So let the exhalation and the releasing of your breath represent. Now, as you breathe out slowly, but release with this breath your past, beginning with the breath and every previous breath you've ever taken, released, every memory of it. Focusing only on this breath that's flowing in right now. Notice if you were to have a new beginning, a new start, a new birth with every intake of breath, and a complete releasing and a complete letting go as you exhale. Notice how this anchors you into the present moment more deeply. I don't know which part of your breath you're at right now, but when it's time to exhale, let go of your name. Release your name. And remember, with your name comes report cards. All of those rankings that you had in school and university, your financial standing, all of the awards you ever received or didn't receive. We are stepping into this space where we all become equal is not the right word. We just entering into a state of being. And then your gender, my gender, as we exhale, we release that. Because we are entering into a space where gender is no longer relevant. And I only say that because we are all allocated genders based on our physical bodies. But I think many of us who've arrived in spaces such as this, we have started to recognize that we have both masculine and feminine qualities, both yin and yang, both Shiva and Shakti. Every ancient civilization had labels for these two qualities. And some of the threads that we noticed in the curtain that made up that belief system, they had a lot to do with the roles that we had to play as a result of this form. Sometimes being quite untrue to ourselves. Blue for boys, pink for girls. Too feminine, too masculine. Let's move beyond it. Breathing in newness, breathing in lightness as you hear my words. And then releasing, letting go of all of this, we'll just call it baggage, feeling the lightness of it. And with gender comes sexual orientation and sexuality, and we all know how much baggage there is associated with that. So let us release that too as we breathe in newness and lightness and exhale and release. No longer needing to play roles, no longer needing to be too this or too that. Arriving into a space of perfection where whatever you find in this present moment to be yourself is free of the standards that can only exist within the mind. And when I say this, I mean, of course, the mind, it has created standards because of its environments. We can call them blueprints. I have to be, you might have watched lots of Walt Disney fairy tales when you were young, where there was Snow White and Prince Charming, and Pride and Prejudice. And then we have this whole blueprint as to what the perfect relationship is like, what the perfect financial status should be like. That's all a part of the curtain. Whether I should be married or in a partnership or single, a blueprint. And that's the curtain. That's the curtain that we want to draw. When I ring the bell, that's a release. All of these blueprints. And if you need to recognize a blueprint, anything at all that you're unhappy about, your body shape, your age, your relationship status, what or you have or haven't accomplished in your life, how many kids you have or don't have. We're going to release all of this so that there are no standards. And when you breathe in, going to begin seeing the perfection in yourself. Free of standards. In many ways, this is what the practice involves. A releasing of the past, of the future, and arriving into this space where we had started this practice by simply sitting, breathing, but something's changed. There's a certain perfection in the sounds around us. Perfection because it represents, rather these sounds, they represent the present moment. all of the sensations that you can experience around your body, even the pins and needles, even the stiff knee, even the tired back, the perfection of this present moment. Of course, if there is stiffness and discomfort, give yourself permission to stretch, to move. How you feel, referring to your emotions. Because what are the emotions? Simply chemicals being released within the body. Taking it all in, both good and bad, but noticing the judgments and then releasing them. And now bringing your attention with this particular bell to your breath. Almost as though at the beginning of, just about a minute ago when we were taking in all of the sounds, the sensations, the emotions, in your mind's eye you see an hourglass. And do you know those old timekeeping devices where it's wide on the top? And then at the narrow bit in the center, where only a single grain of sand slips through, that's the breath. Bring your attention to your breath now. Just enough for a single grain of sand to fit through the passage within your nasal area, the nasal passage. Noticing how, even though you have two nasal passages, you're only utilizing one of them at this moment. Which one is it for you? Are you breathing through your right or your left nasal passage? The warm air as it moves out, the humid breath, the cool air that you're taking in. And now with this bell, which will also represent the end of our practice, this hour that we've had together, expansive, expanding, back to all of the sounds, all of that's happening within your mind, physical sensations, smells, tastes, emotions. Notice how there's a very subtle change in the way in which you feel, having moved through that tiny little funnel at the middle of the hourglass. This funnel, that thin little gap, is always available to you, your breath. This bell represents the beginning of the practice, the real practice, where we bring this hour that we've had together into the world around us, into our interactions, our communications, our travels, our shopping, our cooking, our eating. Reminding ourselves that we always have access. No fancy apps, no fancy electronic devices. Our breath. Thank you all for joining in today's practice. Deeply appreciated as always. Hello, Michelle. Hi. Thank you all. And please always feel free if there was anything that I said that didn't resonate or that confused you, always feel free to message me so that I can somehow clarify or move in whatever direction you'd like me to. Take care, my friends.
Thank you all.
Take care. Bye bye, everyone. Hey, Luke. Bye.